All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. It's 11 a.m. on the 16th of April, and this is our 7th Learning Leaders webinar, which has become quite a successful series that, as a result, and perhaps one of the benefits of COVID, has sort of given us this opportunity to connect with you in a more meaningful way, virtually and remotely, but at least we're still able to connect. I'm very excited. It's the first of 2021, and we have over 130 people joining us today. And more importantly, we have two of our speakers, which is Carmen Meyer and Lara Haskins. And to kick us off, if you guys will just introduce yourself and a bit about your background, and then we'll get into the context of what we'll be discussing today. Carmen?
Thanks, Richard, and thanks for hosting us. My name is Carmen Meyer from Dot Connectors. I've been in the BE skills development employment equity space for about 12 years now. I've got a specific passion and interest in skills development, specifically how it all fits together, especially with employment equity and BE. We consult to various companies, various sizes, various industries. So I'm excited to share some of the lessons that we've learned and some of the things that we've seen with everyone today. So thanks, Lara.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks.
Lara.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, lovely to be here. So 360 HR has been around for about 6 years and assists companies with outsourced HR solutions. So companies who don't have an HR function, and also supporting HR departments with projects. Skills development is something also close to my heart. So really interested to hear the intentions of business owners. Hopefully it's not just ticking boxes, but pure intentions. And yes, I think it's going to be an interesting discussion today to bring in legislation and HR and what's happening in businesses at the moment. Thanks, Richard, Carmen.
Fantastic. I mean, and that's why we have this fantastic combination between the two of you. From Carmen's perspective, perhaps sort of more legislative, BE, tax incentive perspective, and meeting all of those compliance requirements, together with Lara's experience in making that more of a meaningful intervention in sort of best practice or best HR practice methods and methodologies to boosting productivity in businesses and getting the most out of their people. So to kick us off, just to give you some context for those that are attending today, that the rationale for putting this webinar topic together was that we find in our experience that I learned in dealing with some of our clients that there are two things that happen. The one is that some clients wake up at the last minutes just before their financial year ends, and they have this mad rush and urgent desire to spend their skills development budget or any of their other BE budget. And often in those times of stress and last minute, doesn't always get done meaningfully and properly. And so we want to give perspective to how we can avoid buying BE points for the sake of just complying, and how we can more meaningfully, ahead of time, preferably 12 months before the close of your financial year, that you are planning a social as well as a meaningful commercial impact using the BE codes and the other employment equity and compliance reasons to why you have to do those things, but to do it in a way that builds talent pipeline, that inspires and motivates individuals to want to do better in their lives and in their economic careers. And so we're just going to have a discussion. We're going to have a chat about some of the case studies that you guys have experienced, and we're going to interact with the audience. We've got a few polls that we'll launch to get some feedback. And so to give us a kickstart, Carmen, if you could maybe just share with us some of your experiences and what's happening in the market out there.
Thanks, Richard. I think some of the audience members sent some questions in, and I think we will just base our discussions around some of those questions today, because I know it's questions that are on most people's minds. Firstly, why do people see BE as a tick box exercise? You know, you hear it a lot and everyone talks about it and everyone hates it, but funny enough, I think the clients are actually the ones that are the guilty ones most of the time, because like you say, they wait till the very last minute, like the last day of their financial year end, and then they want to quickly spend money, and that's when you get that grudge feeling that, and you know, that's when companies will say, I've got this, I need to spend on socioeconomic development, enterprise development, and supply development. You just spend it for me. I don't care where you spend it. I just need the points. And they say that then, but the grudge feeling comes later when they actually don't know, where they don't actually see it. So I think a lot of it, the fault lies with companies themselves. You know, sometimes it is out of their control. Sometimes they didn't know. We see a lot of companies suddenly go over the 50 million mark. We've actually seen quite a few of those lately, especially 100% Black-owned companies. So they think they are fine, and then they don't realize. And as soon as they cross that 50 million rand mark, they're in the same boat as everyone else. And then if you did not plan a year in advance, then you've got a problem. Then you can be non-compliant. Like we've seen 100% Black-owned companies be non-compliant, and then they're also shocked. So we almost see it as like a short-term strategy, which is not ideal, but it happens because it's also real life and people leave things till the last minute. But obviously we want to get into a habit of doing it, focusing on a long-term strategy. So that needs to happen as soon as your financial year end, that day is over. And I'm sure that's the last thing you want to do, because you've just run around and you try to find a training provider and, you know, try to find beneficiaries. The last thing you want to do is focus now on the next year. But that is the reality, and that is how it should work. I think a big thing, obviously, in this time is COVID and the challenges that has brought. So now we not only have to think about all these strategies, but we also now have to think about COVID and how that's impacted our business. So a lot of companies have asked, but are they going to still carry on with BEE in COVID? I'm sure you've heard that as well. What are they going to do? Are they going to drop the targets? You know, like, and the reality is that we are working on a previous financial year end. So even if you are retrenching people now, you are using a previous financial year end. So your targets will still be high. Your targets might be lower in your next financial year end. So some of the companies, we had a company 1 week into the lockdown, they had to retrench, I think, half of their staff. And we had to give them this budget, and it was 900,000 Rand that they had to spend by the Friday, because they also left it till the last minute. And then they will say, but, you know, how can I let 50% of my staff go, but I need to spend money on BE? So unfortunately, those are the realities. And companies that did plan in advance, I think, were able to handle it better. But yeah, COVID has definitely affected companies big time. Even your skills budgets would have been cut. Recruitment would have been frozen. So your employment strategies probably went out the window. So yeah, just in my experience, you know, the BE space has been, it's been quite tough the past year or since COVID. Lara, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, thanks, Carmen. I think, you know, to start off with, some companies, when they hear BEE, they think I've got to give my business away. They don't really understand what they need to do. But from an HR perspective, where we're dealing specifically with skills development, which I think, in my opinion, is probably one of the easiest ways that companies can get their points, I think the challenges have been now exactly what you say. We were retrenching people, but now we've got to spend money on training and development. We've got succession plans, we've had these plans, losing staff, people have to double up on roles. So I think it has been quite challenging. And again, there are companies that want to do it. And I think it's a way to motivate staff. If they can't now pay extra salaries, it's great to say, okay, we'll put you on some sort of training, sort of development, online training, working that differently. So, you know, as far as complying, I think people need to, or companies are finding it quite challenging as to how to do it, how to get groups together, because it's not just getting together in a boardroom and having a training session and leaving and getting that qualification. So I think it's more online stuff, more focus groups, feedback, and that's how we're going to motivate our staff, because we can't pay bonuses or we can't pay salaries. So let's try and develop you in environments that are already a little bit people are uneasy about their future, about where they're going, about what's happening, and then they've got to still think about BEE on top of it, and they haven't planned, and it's last minute. So I do think my heart goes out to some of the learning and development managers who are sort of sitting in a boardroom and almost like saying, we have to do this, and companies are saying, well, you know, it's really not a priority, and just trying to relook at strategy, relook at HR budgets, and really get creative in the ways that we can develop people. I think that that's really what I found.
What also happened as a result of COVID was because of the lockdown, a lot of the Feb financial year ends pushed their verifications back. So normally they would have had their verifications around October. So we found that a lot of the audits actually happened in Jan. So that means that if a company was able or is able to be without a certificate for 1 or 2 or 3 months, they could actually save a year, if you know what I mean. So that happened quite a bit. But the other result of that was, you know, in general, it's very difficult. Bigger companies have got it sorted out, but in the smaller companies, they struggle between the past financial year end, and I'm preparing for a verification, versus I'm already in my next financial year end and I need to prepare for that. So those two processes sometimes become mingled, and that causes confusion. So I almost want to say, you know, you have to have 2 separate people handling your audit and someone else handling, if you're lucky enough to have the resources. So that's just one of the other challenges with COVID that I've experienced. Richard, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just out of interest, is your BE rating period always and only linked to your financial year? Or can you define the period and then be awarded a certificate for maybe a shorter period or something along those lines?
No, so in the past you could use your management accounts, but not anymore. So you have to use your financial period.
Which just goes to show how much more important it is to plan your BE 12 months in advance.
Yeah, and there's also a limit on how far back you can go of 18 months. So you can't go further back than that. So that you also need to be mindful of, especially now where COVID has delayed everything a little bit.
Yeah. So
okay,
let's take a different,
sorry. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to suggest we take a different tack and talk about what good looks like in companies that have got mature skills development, let's say processes, are doing things 12 months in advance, using learnerships meaningfully within their organization to build talent pipelines. And yeah, I don't know if you've got any particular clients, you don't necessarily have to mention their names, but talk about scenarios where you've seen that work really, really well, and assuming client has the budget to purchase those points.
Yeah, so we do have a lot of clients that really embrace it, and they align their BE strategy to their business strategy. So it's not just a wait till the last minute and spend. With skills development, if you do it that way, you can actually save a lot of money. For example, just one example is if you focus on employed learnerships, for example, you can count the learner or the employee's stipend or salary. So you claim that in your financial period. So obviously, if you wait till the last day or the last month, you are not going to be able to do that. You will only be able to maybe claim 1 month. So obviously, you know, that is almost free money. You are paying a salary already. You should be maximizing on those things. You can only do it, though, if you prepare properly in advance. Another very important thing with skills development, and Lara, you can also jump in here, is to do a proper skills needs analysis. Very important is to know what your employee's highest NQF level of qualification is. Because what I also see, and you know, Richard, like that last day, people will just say, I need so many African females, so many African males. They don't even care like what these people can do. They just put them on any learnership, and that is a recipe for failure. If you know in advance, and I know now because we are busy submitting WSPs, the CETAs want to know that. They want to know what the highest qualification is. And you know how few companies have got that information. There's not a lot. If you do, then you know, I can't send someone on an NQF level 5 if they've only got an NQF level 3. They're probably not going to make it. So it gives you a baseline to plan what you are going to do. Another thing is also to avoid just sending people on random courses, is to almost start with the end in mind. So if I know that I want this person to have a generic management qualification at the end of it, is to start at that qualification, go look at what the skills programs are that fall within that qualification or the unit standards, and almost work backwards. So like qualification mapping or whatever you want to call it. That way, because a lot of companies, what I've also found now in COVID is people can't afford to let their staff go to training courses because they have to make money. Usually they are billable, they can't let them go. So if you do it that way, you can break it up a little bit easier, and it's not so time consuming on the learner and on the companies.
Yeah, I'd like to connect in. Yeah, sorry, Laura. I wanted to connect in that skills assessment idea, because I think that's where it starts. Is that if you sort of very accurately know the education level of your organization, and therefore the skills gaps measured to the job profiles or job requirements, which informs your training plan, which if you know ahead in 12 months time, that's how you link it into strategy. So you do that first and you say, okay, well, if our strategy is to provide or improve our employee value proposition, or one of our strategies is to ensure that we meet the BEE codes and achieve a level 2. Then you start linking in and planning 12 months in advance. So Laura, where have you seen that work in some of your clients, in specifically, and maybe even the harder ones, or those clients that have nothing? They have no job profiles, they have no job descriptions, no succession planning, etc.
Yeah. I think, it falls on HR's shoulders, and I've found, like I said, that in a few organizations, it's become the motivation. So we can't pay you a salary, but let's see what courses, even soft skills, how can we develop you instead of paying you a bonus? Let's put something together, and that then aligns with strategy. And employees are getting quite excited because they can almost do it in their own time, even though we find we don't have our own time anymore, because I think people feel that they're not working from home, but they're living at work. So, a lot of smaller companies are saying when they're at home doing nothing, or in their free time, which I just think is, we aren't doing nothing. So to find that time to study, to make that time, and I think to make it part of a weekly focus group where everyone gets together, improves the skills. I just wanted to mention on the learnership thing, I think it's quite difficult for the learners to get that on-the-job work experience, and I think that's where the challenges are, where we were talking about learnership. Certainly employed learners as well, job functions have changed, roles are becoming dual roles. So I think the companies that I've worked with are really trying to make it online, because we're all working online and life has become online. So I think doubling up as a bit of a team build, as a bit of a reconnect. People that are coming back into the office are using the first hour to maybe reconnect, talk about training. So it is happening, and I think people also, there was a whole thing about development and developing yourself, even personally, not only professionally. And another thing I found is that companies are also trying to put together some sort of coping skills, stay connected. Mental health is a big thing. Just keep there. So all of that, I think it's quite forward thinking and quite progressive. I know it deviates a bit from the whole BE strategy and the technical stuff, but I have found that there are companies that are really trying to develop staff, and it's nice to get involved with those sorts of discussions, and it's quite positive and uplifting, because I think we all have to adapt to the way we learn and train, and even,
yeah, so I think one of the ways of adapting is going online in learning and development, and providing learning and development experiences, which is either virtually or self-paced online. And I think we must differentiate between those two, because it's not the same. Where are you seeing like wide adoption amongst your client base and appetites to learn in those formats? Or maybe it's a hybrid of both, a little bit of instructor there, a little bit of online. What are you seeing working well?
I think a lot of people do want to get back to being with their colleagues, and I just think the time at work is then, it's not, oh, we're just going to be at work for the next 5 days. So they want to make it meaningful and, make meaningful team meetings, not just go in for the sake of going in. So a lot of companies are maybe working 3 days in, 2 days at home, and there's policies coming through like that. So when they are at the office, it really is to connect. Everybody comes in, everybody makes a plan to be together, and I've just found that then a little bit of a focus group or a session, but not formal learning. I haven't experienced formal learning providers coming in and giving training, classroom training, standing up with a whiteboard like we did before COVID. It's more definitely online facilitation.
Okay.
I'm very old school there. I prefer the face-to-face. I have seen some very good training, where it's a facilitator skill as well, I think, is to keep people engaged, because people are people. They work while they are supposed to be on a course. So I'm not a huge fan of it, but I know companies are, so I think if you can get that blended approach right, I think that's where COVID did us a favor, right? Because the teachers were now forced to adopt these online training methodologies and stuff, which they were opposed to. I know we've been trying for years to get it out of them. So that's one good thing, I think, that did come out of COVID. But Richard, just to go back,
especially the services theater in particular.
Yes, exactly. So just to go back to the theme of today, and it's turning your skills development strategy into action. So a very important thing is to not jump straight into the action without knowing your scorecard. Very, very important. I see this a lot. So companies sort of just assume they are on the generic scorecard, whereas if you look at the MAC charter and you look at the financial sector and the ICT sector, it's very different. So if you have got the wrong strategy, you're not going to get there, and you're going to train the wrong training. So on the MAC charter, for example, they focus on unemployed learnerships that you don't get points for employed learners. If you don't know that, you might implement not the wrong training, you know what I mean? Obviously you'd still train your employed people, but if you're doing it purely from a strategy, skills development strategy for BE, then you have to be mindful of those things. Same with the construction charter. There, with skills development, the thresholds are different in terms of what an EME, QSE, and generic is. So it's very low. It breaks it down into like built contractors and whatever, BEP and contractors, but it's like 3 million. So what happens there is a lot of the time they can get away with it because no one picks it up. But as soon as your client picks it up, or an auditor or a verification agency picks it up, they actually have to comply with skills development, even if they are 51% Black owned. So there are things like that where you could miss the boat completely if you don't know your scorecard. So that would be my very first tip, is to know exactly what you're working towards.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I know they vary across, in fact, do you know how many sector charters there are actually in total?
I'm gonna lie, I know how many seaters there are. There's quite a few. There's quite a few that are also almost coming out now. The petroleum one is almost coming out, or they've been saying that for a while. The legal one is quite controversial at the moment. So that one, very controversial. The financial one, for example, on skills development, you have to break it down, your management levels, into junior management and middle management, and that's how you need to train. So that's very different to how it is on the generic codes. So my advice would be to definitely know exactly what is required of you from that point of view.
And I jump in here as well, and I think that's the challenge, Carmen, is that companies don't know. There's not internal knowledge about BEE and about all these little details and compliance requirements, and I think that is where people are falling short, because they just don't have that internal know-how, even though the intentions are there. I think that's why, you know, chatting to someone like you who specialize in that, you realize that there are a lot of companies that do partner with external experts, but there is a lack of internal knowledge across all levels.
Yeah, and I think what's also happening in the industry, and I suppose it's anywhere where there's consultants, is there's a lot of, I want to say, unethical consulting, where everything is now about getting something out of it. So you know what I mean? It's more about what I can put in my own pocket. So a lot of people have lost faith in consultants, and it's very difficult to then build up that trust. So that, I would say, is probably most of our job, is to, because we usually get clients like that where they've been burnt in the past and now they have to trust someone again. And it's like, if I go to a mechanic and I give them my car, I've got absolutely no clue. I just do what they say. And it's a huge risk, right, in terms of BE. So one of the questions was also, what can we do to plan better for BE so that it doesn't feel like a tick box exercise? And I think one thing is to educate your managers. In smaller companies, the CEO usually knows all about BE, and it's very important to them. In your bigger companies, the CEO usually knows, but not all the managers know. So your procurement manager, for example, must know the ED the enterprise development, supplier development, and procurement very well. Your financial manager obviously needs to be involved, because they are there to provide the figures, and they need to understand that. Your HR managers need to understand skills development and employment equity very well. So, and also what I see in very big companies is they work in silos. So they do a lot of very amazing things when it comes to BE, but because they don't see it as BE, it falls through the cracks. So CSI, corporate social responsibility incentives, for example, you know, they do those things anyway. So your CSI manager needs to be trained on the SED element, even if it's just on the SED element. So the education.
Don't you find, even in those organizations where the different elements are spread across various functions in the business, that there's still no one single person that owns the scorecard and its strategy?
Yeah, and that's the problem, right? And yes, a consultant is there to guide you, but there needs to be someone that can pull it all together, because that is also.
Ideally? Do you think that's the CEO?
I'm finding that HR's responsibility to then get the stuff from procurement, get the stuff from finance. That's what I found in a few companies, that it does become an HR responsibility.
It depends on the size of the company. If it's a big company, then you do need a transformation manager. But in smaller companies, it's usually, like you say, it's the finance manager or it's the HR manager that would focus, but they're usually not very clued up. And, you know, BE, it's like, you know, it moves every day. So if you're a finance manager, you've got such a big job already to now know exactly what's happening and what the verifiers are thinking today versus yesterday. It's very difficult. And that is where a little thing can change everything, you know. So and it's knowledge. It comes back to just knowledge and training your staff.
The other thing that I find is that because no one person owns the scorecard, they lose out. There's an opportunity cost of losing out on the ability to integrate the elements amongst each other, and not so when they do it in silos. So you could do a learning solution, for example, and yes, I am biased because we're a learning provider, but you could do a learning solution for skills development reasons and bring in enterprise development spend into the same group and get cost efficiencies by pulling it together, as opposed to doing it separately, for example.
Yeah, and this is where employment equity and skills development is also very close. What I saw a client yesterday actually where there's a freeze on recruitment. there's a freeze or a freeze on the budget for skills development, but they've still got an employment equity target and they've got a BEE target. So this is where employment equity and skills development now gets together in terms of succession planning, retention strategies, promotion, career development, and that's also where you can get points. So I don't know, Lara, if you want to talk a little bit about that, and just in terms of that.
Aligning those.
Yeah, and I think that's what I also alluded to earlier about the whole career development succession plan, performance discussions do sort of align with those things. It is, the landscape is definitely changing and the approach is changing to the way that, some companies do see it as a tick box, I must say, and it's almost like HR again asking for something else. So it is challenging, but where it is part of the strategy, it is happening, and I do think it's part of the succession plan, and managers are updating what their employees are wanting to do, and people are also re-looking at their own lives and their own goals and what they want to do, and aligning that with some of what the business is doing. So, yeah, Carmen, I must say, in my experience, it is quite positive. Where it can be, if there aren't budget constraints and resource constraints as far as people, and I think someone has to drive it. I think that's like with any process, someone's got to drive it. Chat to the managers. Have you done it? We need it. I mean, I'm sure you know what it's like trying to get stuff in on time, deadlines, and I think that's where it is, and that's what gives HR a bad name, is because we're always sitting on people asking them to complete stuff and do stuff, which when it's done, it's great. Once it's done, everybody's happy and it's beneficial and it's positive, but it's getting it done.
So
yeah, I'm gonna launch a poll. I'd like to get some insight from the audience, and let's see what people are managing. If they can all take a few seconds to vote in your poll. Are your business leaders actively and regularly engaged in the conversations and programs related to skills development? It'll be great to get a sense for what the audience is experiencing at the moment, and yeah, we can report to you back on sort of what the average is when you're done. Sorry,
okay,
Carmen, you were
yeah, I just want to get to, I think what most people are probably interested in is how to turn strategies into operational ideas. So I just want to go back to, like, you need to know your scorecard, because that is going to tell you what you need to put in place. So for example, if you look at the ICT scorecard, it's very specific on that industry. So your enterprise development initiatives or beneficiaries, those initiatives must go to ICT companies. So if you don't know that, you might have this amazing idea and it's just not in line with your charter. The same with socioeconomic development on the ICT charter, it has to be ICT specific. So you might go and spend money on school fees for your employees' children. And then when it comes to audit, they're like, no, but it should have been spent on ICT initiatives. So it's very, very important to know what sector you're in, because that is going to inform your strategy and the implementation of it.
So the results from the poll.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah. So the results from the poll is that 58% of the audience said to a certain degree, and 33% said yes, which is really good, and 8% said no. Okay. So I think that's actually quite promising, even if to a certain degree, which is the lion's share there. It's still still means you're on the train. Comment?
So,
you were going to say?
Yeah, just to go back to like the operational ideas, and let's just look at socioeconomic development as an example. If you're a small company, I find that it's better to focus on one initiative than spread it out too much, and rather build that one initiative and get very involved. Because that's where this grudge thing comes in. People want to actually see where their money is going, and actually most of the time people want to be involved. So it's quite nice. Our company is assisting this disabled guy he actually just started taking children in, disabled children, and it just sort of grew and grew, and we've been involved with him, and he's actually now busy building a school for the disabled children with a hostel. It's very nice to see. They also offering skills to the community, like sewing and knitting, and they are farming black mushrooms or oyster mushrooms or whatever. So that is really putting back into the community and helping people to get into the economy. That's the whole thing about socioeconomic development. But it shouldn't be a short-term thing, like it needs to be a long-term engagement. And then large companies don't like doing that, so they would rather split it. But in that case, rather find initiatives that are synergistic to each other. So if you are going to split it, let it all sort of have something to do with each other. Just some other sort of tips and tricks with regards to getting points for not a lot of money or getting funding is, that we at Dot Connectors like to apply for discretionary funding for our companies. Look, it's not for everyone. We deal with the SETAs. It's not always that.
Why is it not for everyone?
I won't go into that. What makes it difficult is the timing, because we are working with the company's financial year end. We are working with SETAs that have these funding windows that open randomly. We don't know. It's only open for a month. So to get that aligned, that's the trickiest part. But if you do get that right, and this is where the long-term strategy comes in. So we're busy with WSPs at the moment. When we do the WSPs, we do it with our company's skills development targets in mind for the next financial year. So it's very like a long-term strategy. And then we set it up like that. So we make sure that the critical and scarce skills are there. We make sure that what we know we are going to apply for in a year, we already put on our pivotal plan, because we try to maximize our chances of getting the funding from the SETA. If this works, and we've done this successfully with lots of companies, you can actually almost half or even cover your full skills development spend. Obviously, there's terms and conditions, because you don't get all the money in one go from the SETA and stuff like that. But when it does work, it works well. And I think the companies that we've assisted have been doing it continuously for a couple of years now, because they see we sort of absorb all the pain for them, so they don't have to deal with the SETAs. But and I know a lot of the big companies are already doing that. Surprisingly, a lot of the big companies that I've worked with didn't even know about it. So I never want to assume that people do it or know about it, because I've seen that. So another thing is, I've spoken about the employed learnerships. Just from an ED and a supplier development point of view, that you can also give loans to companies. But it's about the duration. So you have to give the loan sort of in the beginning of the year, and it has to remain outstanding. So those things you can't do on the last day, but you can do it just after, so on the first day of your financial year end. Another big thing is, if a company, I'm talking about large companies, do a lot of training, a lot of them are now looking at getting their own accreditation, maybe just for like their induction, and they get their induction process accredited. But also, and you will know this, Richard, you need to become a partner with your training providers, and you need to think outside the box. And you can only have those discussions if you have a very good relationship with a training provider. We have to be creative. The learning program matrix is, I get very upset about it because it's so rigid, especially in the ICT sector. It does not cater for the complexities and the actual important and critical and scarce skills. Usually those things that are critical and scarce are not the things that get recognized on the BEE scorecard. So look, it is what it is, right? I thought they were going to amend it with the revised ICT codes, but they didn't. So now we need to be creative, right? So this is where you need to be in touch with your training provider. If you are a leader in something, let's say it's fourth industrial revolution, I don't know, whatever, partner with the training provider, add it together, add it as one learnership, like have just have these conversations, because those things are possible if everyone just sits together.
That's true.
And also just to build your relationship with the CETA, especially if you are in a sector where it's niche and you are the leader, is to build those relationships. Mixed CETA, for example, they've got these focus groups now on fourth industrial revolution, AI, and all of that. And if there's funding that you need, and it's a critical and scarce skill in South Africa, this is where you have to get involved with the CETA, because they will then, you know, have these projects that they do, or funded projects that they will do for companies. So yeah,
Okay,
those are just a couple of the
fantastic. Those are great. I'd like to hear from you, Lara, in your experience in thinking about scarce and critical skills from for an industry. Are HR managers and companies thinking about that, and are they to a large extent applying for funding for training programs that are covering or bringing in candidates to cover that cost of training? What's the general appetite, and how was it done?
I think discretionary grants, I think people don't, or companies don't really understand what it means. And don't understand how they can access it. And some companies think, oh, it's discretionary, it's free, I'm just going to get it up and do what I want with it. So I think, again, it's that knowledge or lack of knowledge. So I think for someone to know what's going on. From a scarce skill point of view, I think it starts from a recruitment perspective. I don't think it's sort of learnerships and those types of things. I think scarce skills are identified, and certainly now when companies are making themselves leaner, the scarce skills are the ones that are staying, and the people with the scarce skills are either being developed or retained. And there's a lot of skills transfer that I find is happening within companies, suppose succession planning, that type of thing, around scarce skills. It's also, again, the definition of what is a scarce skill varies from industry to company to also operational requirements. So yeah, when you say appetite, I think it really just depends, and I think it works on a needs basis at the moment. But certainly, I think the more informed companies are, the more they will be open to looking at things, understand what the DG process is, for example, Carmen, and you may find that as well, that when companies suddenly realize what they have access to because they pay a skills levy and because there is a CETA involved, it does open up some avenues for companies who were limited previously.
Yeah, just on the critical and scarce skills, I've found that has changed significantly over the past years since I've been involved in skills development. No one even used to actually look at those two tabs. You just sort of ignored them and submitted your WSP. Whereas now it's actually, to me, it's become the most important part on the WSP. The CETAs obviously use that information to make the discretionary funding programs or funded programs available. So it's based on the information that you input into the WSP. So it's important, that you take care and you actually, so just maybe for people who don't know, scarce skills are those positions that you struggle to fill for whatever reason. It could be geography, it could be a technical skill, new, equity reasons, replacement demand, whatever it is. And critical skills are those core or priority skills, what the BE verifies call priority skills, and that you also need to show or prove that you've implemented at your BE audit. So they go back to your WSP to check what you've listed as critical and scarce. And I think this is where training needs to evolve a little bit. I think people are so sick of the generic, like all the learnerships that are there. But it's we can't change it. So that's why I know, Richard, for example, I think your one learnership does have, like, I can't remember what it is now. You just have to correct me. There's like some technical thing that's in the learnership. So you get the learnership plus you get, like, let's say Java or whatever it is. I think we have to do more and more of those things to be able to meet the two together, because I mean those learnerships are so old. I think people are so sick of them.
They are. The one you're thinking of is our technical support NQF4 qualification, where we've overlaid a international vendor certification together with the local qualification, making it more relevant. Because specifically in the IT sector, they actually prefer vendor certifications over the local qualifications.
Yeah.
And I think also because it's such an ever-changing industry, and technology and certification programs are basically changing almost every year. So yeah, I think that's what you meant. All right, so let's try another poll. I'd be interested to find out how COVID is affecting everybody and to what extent. About a year ago when we ran a webinar, there was a sort of a 50-50 split in response to how companies were dealing with COVID and what sort of impact it was having on their skills development budget. And what was so interesting is that whilst we know that COVID has had such a dramatic impact on businesses, the results of that poll that we did then was that 50% were affected and 50% weren't. So now that we're a year later, it'll be very interesting to see what sort of has gone on in the markets. But Lara, in your experience, have you seen mass retrenchments, or so what's going on in terms of personnel in companies, and what are companies doing about COVID?
Yeah, I think, retrenchment is always the last resort, so certainly short term. I must say that it has, the market's become quite buoyant, recruitment's picking up. So it really depends on who you speak to, because some people are unfortunately struggling because projects haven't been renewed, and other people are almost flourishing and capitalizing. So it really depends on the industry. So from that perspective, there are retrenchments happening. There's also recruitment happening. So I think
in those same companies, recruitment and retrenchment.
Yeah, it really depends on who you speak to and what industry. But for me, I see more of the bringing in staff, re-looking at strategy. It's all. I mean, I think companies have always looked at cost cutting, and certainly now more so, people are really conscious of that and being creative. And I think that's something that Carmen mentioned as far as I think companies are trying to be creative just with everything from an HR perspective. And again, I think I've mentioned it previously, like motivating staff, not with bonuses, and I know, training's not going to pay your immediate expenses, but it is a way that companies are trying to motivate staff. It's always been a motivating factor, and I think more so trying to look for non-financial ways for staff to be engaged.
So what are some of the other, I'd be interested to know, what are some of the other non-financial mechanisms or tactics that companies are doing to keep employees engaged and interested in a hard time?
So certainly a lot of companies are looking at the whole mental health type of thing and getting groups together. Some companies are doing monthly get-togethers. One company that I work with actually sort of had little packs delivered to their employees with rusks and coffee and made them open it during the team meeting. So, just trying to do a bit of a team get together, that cohesion. I think people are missing that contact, trying to make contact as human as possible through a screen, Richard, and certainly coping skills. So even training, online stuff, sharing what you've done, realizing that you're not all alone, because I think mental health, and you can see it all over social media and everyone talks about it, people are struggling, and I think that's one way. And where people didn't have a wellness or employee assistance program, certainly trying to bring something in. Another client has done some sort of an online sort of 30-day fitness type of eating plan sort of thing. Let's see who can cut out sugar. Let's see who can sort of run the furthest. So those sorts of things. And I think it's good. Healthy body, healthy mind. It's sort of just ways that companies are trying to connect each other. And I think that's what I'm finding, certainly from the HR side, that it's just that connection is lacking. And again, we always did connect through training, even through your classroom training. People got to know each other through icebreakers. You walked out, you got to know. Diversity training was great. You suddenly realized, saw people in a different light, or opened up even technical training. So I think there definitely is something about skills development that brings people together. If that answers your question, Richard.
Yeah, very much so, and really heartwarming to hear that there seems like there's a really big effort, obviously on the part of senior managers and MDs out there trying to save their businesses and are looking after their people. So the results of the poll was that, yeah, so the results of the poll was, you know, how has COVID affected your plans or strategies, perhaps as a business? And 57% said, which is quite a lot, said they've had to completely change their plans, while only 30% have had minor changes. So yeah, I think we're really starting to see the impacts of COVID 12 months later on businesses and people's mental well-being and how they're dealing with it. Carmen,
Richard, this is where I think companies really need to be clever on BE, because you know we want to do everything wonderfully. But when you put your business hat on and you have to retrench people and you have to make those hard decisions, it does become difficult, right? At the end of the day, we have to keep the business afloat. So then you have to look at things like, if you have to spend 2 million Rand on skills development, you want to find a training provider that's 51% Black owned. Because you want to tick 2 boxes, you know, those are the things that you then have to look at, because that's how you're going to sort of save money, if I can put it that way. It's those strategies that I think companies would have to look at.
Yeah, we've been getting requests for a guarantee absorption for unemployed learners going on a learnership before they start, because you know that's 5 bonus points. So we've been putting under pressure to guarantee that those learners are going to be absorbed, which, you know, is absolutely impossible.
But that's what I just also wanted to say to you. So I know, I mean, all training providers probably feel the same way. It's almost like you go to a restaurant and you just say what you want, right?
Yes.
I think this is where a lot goes wrong as well in terms of the exit success rate. And I think this is where companies need to take responsibility of skills development. You can't just get a training provider and you think you've paid them a lot of money and they just need to deal with it, because it's still your responsibility. So there, I think companies need to be more responsible in terms of mentoring and coaching, making sure POEs are submitted, making sure, like I said, it's the right qualification or right level for the employee. But it's usually the ones that do it on the last day that you've got that problem. Again, like if you have time to properly do it, you know, you can pre-assess the learners properly. So yeah, that is important.
Yeah, just by and large, the more involved a client is in a learnership experience, regardless if it's employed or unemployed or disabled learners, the higher the success rates. So what I mean by more involved is we've seen clients do things like sort of be more disciplining the learners, mostly for unemployed learners. And they sort of hold a very tight line on POE submissions and meeting deadline dates and attendance and all of that sort of thing. The other thing that's been realized, some companies will get, if we're running a module within a particular qualification that covers an area of business, they'll get the leader of that business to come and present for an hour on how they're doing it in their organization, for example. Yeah, and then they'll make sure that the manager or mentor for that learner on that qualification is obviously ensuring the application of what we're teaching in the workplace. And it just makes it a much richer experience. And at the end of the day, why are we doing it? So that the learner will gain the certificate, the qualification, and the recognition.
To me, South Africa's solution is skills development. Maybe I'm biased, but to me, So I'm sure you've also found in COVID, we had companies who had learners on learnerships, and they retrenched staff. And now you're conflicted, right? Because you had to let your staff go, but you have to keep the learners on for BE. So we had a lot of those like conflicting emotions, and it brings out the worst in people, you know, like when they have to make decisions like that. I hope we're past that now. I hope there's not going to be another lockdown. But yeah, it was challenging.
Yeah, I'm sure. Lara, to close off, and because we've got five minutes left of our 1 hour allocation, Tell us about, we spoke about it earlier, I don't know if we closed that loop, in sort of understanding the education level within organizations of every person and how do they determine, sort of the training needs. Can you maybe just for people out there, give us some insight into how you develop training needs based on some sort of a skills assessment? Like what are the actual tactical steps and processes you go through to determine that?
I think it also depends on where you're starting. Some companies will do it as part of the recruitment process. You know what skills you're bringing in, you're keeping it on a system, you're continually developing. And I think, if that is happening during performance discussions, if the training's happening, it's quite sort of difficult to give an overview. It really all depends. I think you need to be on top of it, and it's again an HR function where HR can say, right, this is what the company needs. How does that align with certain departments? Specifically, I think it's easier for technical skills to look at the technical skills, and then it's also operational priorities, which is really important. So one needs to have a lot that you take into consideration. I just think knowing as much as you know that you've got so many African females, so many Indian males, so many managers, so many unskilled workers, I think you should also know the educational levels and where people are going. So, I think that's a good starting point. Knowledge is power, always just knowing what you have in your organization. And Carmen, you might find this as well in the bigger organizations. There's so much or so many skills that you just don't know that people possess because they're in procurement, but they've got a master's degree in marketing or whatever it is. And I find there's just so much wasted knowledge in organizations because it's not properly understood, or managers don't know how to properly do these skills analysis. So yeah.
I've actually found a couple of, in this week, there are some nice platforms out there that companies are utilizing to track skills, to track mentoring and coaching, to sort of see, okay, this person needs coaching and then this person has that skill. So there are some nice online platforms available.
Okay, excellent. Because that's something we've found difficult in our experience in seeing that clients have got a very clear picture of the skills profile within an organization and can compare that easily with the job requirements that those people are in and performing some sort of an assessment that determines the gap and therefore the competency gap for a job and a role that you can automatically recommend training to fill those gaps. It seems like there's quite a manual process. I think there's an opportunity there somewhere, but yeah.
I was going to say an opportunity. It is time consuming, and it is. But I think with online, everything's becoming online. I think even South African companies were never progressive about remote working, and I think COVID has certainly made a lot of companies realize that it's about output. And not about sitting at your desk from 8 to 5, because that was the expectation. And I just think that is one huge positive that has come out. Look, not everybody copes in a remote environment, and not everybody can be in a remote environment. So that's certainly another discussion. But I just think output and companies realizing that people can be efficient doing that. And I think these sorts of things, you just sort of, the penny needs to drop, and you need to realize that. I think with everything, that once it's done, it actually makes things far more efficient.
Richard, I actually think that artificial intelligence is going to completely change everything. I think we are not there yet, but I do think if you look at psychometric testing and stuff and the way that's changing, I think eventually we're going to know exactly what every person needs to do based on assessments. And so I think that is the future for skills needs analysis and training and development. And yeah, it's exciting to see what's going to happen.
I agree. I think I'm going to go quickly and develop that product. I think there's an opportunity there. So, yes. But we have reached 12 o'clock. 1 hour goes quickly when you have so much interesting content and stuff to talk about, which gives us an opportunity to create another webinar, which we'll start to do more regularly. Carmen and Lara, I'm very grateful for your time and your energy and your expertise that you brought with us today. And I wish you well, Carmen. Best of luck for the end of April for all your CETA submissions. I know you're under pressure and are not sleeping, or at least sleeping well. And Lara, yeah, just continue doing the fantastic work that you're doing and making such a phenomenal impact on the clients and people that you deal with. And yeah, have a great Friday, and wishing you all well. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.